Welcome to the Beyond the Horizon podcast. In this month's cybersecurity news roundup, Enable head nerd Lewis Pope covers a major Windows 11 24H2 installation bug, a newly exploited Outlook vulnerability, law enforcement crackdowns on cybercriminals, and the latest patching priorities. Stay tuned for everything you need to know to keep your system secure. And now, over to Lewis.
So, security news. What's happened over the past month? A few things. One is there is a unique issue with Windows 11 24H2. If you, like most anybody that grabs new systems, reloads them, or you've had to refresh systems for some reason over the past 3 or 4 months, this might be an issue you're running into and you know about or you don't know about. This is a problem with any Windows 11 24H2 installs that were done with installation media that was created in October or November that have those updates incorporated into them. Microsoft's guidance at the moment is to reinstall. There is no in-place fix for this, so this is rather irritating situation to be in, but it's the only guidance that's available. And the problem this is creating is, of course, you have systems out there in deployment that are not going to take any new updates. This is a challenge for everybody. For us on the Enable side with patch management, that means that we're not going to detect anything on the endpoint because the endpoint doesn't know any better. Something is broken. So unfortunately, again, the only fix for this is to uninstall these systems. So I would have it as an action item for this month to go back, review tickets, review systems, follow up on any deployments or new installations that happen to make sure that they're not suffering from this issue. Now 24H2, the update itself, no problem if it shows up and appears in patch management inside of N-Central or Insight. That'll function and behave just as you would expect it to do. You shouldn't run into any issues after the update. Right now, this is only affecting systems that were installed using Windows installation media during this short time frame in October and November that included the updates that are causing the issue. For another CISA advisory went out about an Outlook remote code execution vulnerability from way back in 2024, CVE 2024-21413. There has been a fix available for this since February 13th of last year. Whenever Microsoft released this, it was marked as exploitation unlikely. And now there has been finally, a whole year later, evidence of exploitation. It has been added to the CISA's known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. It is a vulnerability that allows for the attacker to bypass Outlook's protections against malicious links and outbound traffic. And if an attacker chains this together with an NTLM hash, capture attack and a replay attack, that means they have what they need to masquerade as an authenticated user in the environment. And I'm bringing this one up because, yes, it's a whole year since the fix was available for this, but CISA is having to go out and advise people that, hey, this is being exploited now because people have not been updating this. And it now is a mandate that if you're providing services to the feds or you are a federal entity, you now have a timer going on how long you have to apply these fixes. This just goes to show how important it is to make sure that your vulnerability management practices, your patching practices are getting audited, that they're resilient enough that you can not only have confidence in that whenever you tell something to apply a patch, it's going to apply a patch, but also that you have measures in place to catch these systems that are not. Whether that's automated, whether that's an automated system you have in place, manual auditing and review, whatever it is, you should be accounting for it to make sure that you don't wind up in a situation like this. Because it's usually the vulnerabilities that aren't addressed that get taken advantage of by threat actors. Been a lot of news in a lot of law enforcement news recently over a ton of cybercrime gangs and other transnational organized crime being hit with takedown operations. There's been quite a few cybercrime forums that have been taken down, and the people associated with them arrested over the past few months. Cracked, Nulled, World Market, Alpha Bay. There were a ton of Lockbit affiliates and money mules that were in the EU last month. There were over 1,000 arrests in across Africa related to cybercrime activity over the past month. So the wheels are in motion. The things slowly progress. Actions are being taken, but it does show that hey, they will be dealt with, they will be taken down, but that doesn't mean that something else doesn't just come back up and replace them. So this is useful information for you to have whenever you're trying to tell the story about why the services you offer as an MSP have to be updated. Why what you used to do 2 or 3 years ago is no longer sufficient to deal with the threats that exist because, well, these individuals are being arrested, these operations are being interrupted, but they're going to be replaced by somebody new using new tools, modified tools, new tactics, new techniques, new processes, new procedures, and we have to keep up with that in order to protect you. Bringing this back up again, since I got a lot of feedback on this, in case anybody missed this last month. The LOLRMM list. This is a list of remote monitoring and management tools. This is a great resource for you to go find. Well, what are the RMM tools, the remote access tool, the remote management tools that are available out there that I'm not using, but others may be, particularly threat actors may be using? These are all legitimate tools. They're not hacking tools or anything like that. They're just for rats. They are just legitimate tools that can be used for malicious actions. Having this list can do a lot for you. One, just general awareness, but also it can help you look for these things. If you go and do audits, or you implement some star rules inside of your EDR solution, or you add some detection rules to your SIM or XDR, or you go to Insight or Incentral and create a service monitor or a 24/7 check or daily safety check to look for any of these applications running. And that can give you a heads up of shadow IT. Maybe it's a churn indicator because a competitor's installing their stuff in your environment. It could be an indicator of an external threat actor gaining access and trying to set up a beachfront for themselves, or it could be, insider threat indicator. The link for this repository is in the handout in the tools section, so be sure to go check that out. If you have never gone through the exercise, if you have not already had the infrastructure and the processes set up to find these types of applications, I always recommend you do it, one, for the security improvements, but also for the fact that nothing will stop a churn risk faster than one of your clients calling somebody else to come in and do something. That other IT person MSP, somebody's cousin, whoever it is, comes in, installs one of these tools, and you're picking that up almost immediately and giving them a phone call, or if you're using the STAR rules and EDR, locking down their system, or if you're using custom detection rules over in your MDR or XDR service, locking down the system automatically. You locking that system down almost as soon as somebody touches it is going to stop a potential churn faster than almost anything else, because it proves that you are paying attention, that you're taking your job and your responsibility seriously. Network equipment has been vulnerability after vulnerability after vulnerability for the past couple of months between Cisco, Fortinet, Ivanti, others. The one for this month I was going to bring up is that Zexel, just because Zexel is popular in small businesses, small office, home office. There is a vulnerability that's been disclosed at CVE 2025-0890. It is not going to be addressed by Zexel. You're going to have to make the replacement. You're going to have to go replace it with a supported model to address this vulnerability issue. There are actually multiple vulnerabilities that are affecting these appliances, but I just picked out this one because it is a insecure default credentials on the telnet service that's running on these, that if somebody can access it, well, they have command line access to that router, which can open up the door for them to exploit other vulnerabilities, further the attack. But this is a good example of sometimes there is not a fix, unfortunately. Once a hardware vendor decides they are going to end of life something and no longer support it, there is a shelf life on it. There is a point in time at which the risk of continuing to run it is going to be too great. And it's better to have a conversation with clients ahead of time that something should be replaced. One of the things I always coach on is that it is much easier to have a conversation with a client and properly budget to replace a piece of equipment that's going to go end of life in a year or two than it is to try to convince a client that what is in place and working just fine as far as they are concerned now needs to be replaced simply because it's no longer supported a year ago. Those are two very different conversations you have to have. The focus on ESX ransomware attacks is still increasing. I've seen quite a few engagements where the ESX boxes are what's being compromised in the environment. And it's because, well, ESX is Linux, in quotes there. But in all honesty, not everybody is geared up and skilled up enough to securely manage Linux in your environments, but yet ESX is there running all of the critical infrastructure that a business needs on top of it. So this is one of those situations where things are precariously balanced on top of something that's typically not being monitored. And that's why these VMware boxes are becoming targets, especially in more complex interactive attacks. There are multiple vulnerabilities that exist in VMware appliances, depending on which version of ESX you're running. Also, in vSphere, there's vulnerabilities. But what's happening now is there's a new little twist where threat actors are starting to use SSH tunneling to help create persistence for themselves to those ESXi boxes. So they get into an environment, they start poking around, they do their reconnaissance, they drop their malware payload, their ransomware payload, and they set themselves up an SSH tunnel that ESX box so that they can come back in and touch it again. If you happen to find how they got into the environment, find that there's actually in there, and you evict them because you disable the user account that's associated with their activity. You disable the RDP on the devices they used. You put new firewall rules in place, but yet the attacker can walk right back in because they set up this tunnel ahead of time. If you're not looking for those, if you don't know how to audit for those, it absolutely is a challenge, and it can put you in situations where a client is hit with an incident. You go, you investigate, you resolve it, it's dealt with, they're back into production, and then the next day the threat actors are putting the environment right back in the same state because you didn't really evict them. There is threat hunting and IOCs available for this type of attack. I do have it linked in the handout today. So if you're on the business side of the house and you usually don't get this down into the server infrastructure and the hosting infrastructure, this is definitely something to have a touch point with that team about, to make sure that they are aware of these types of attacks and that there's some type of auditing or monitoring in place that can, or at the minimum, that your incident response playbooks have it covered, that these are the types of things you should investigate if there is ever an incident in an environment running ESXi boxes. Again, putting it back out there because I think it's really important, and more people should be attempting to move towards zero trust architecture and design. So there is the updated NIST publication 1800-35. It outlines best practices around zero trust architecture, lessons learned, how to implement. It is a high level, there's a high level overview and a full documentation available for this. And this is one of those, you're not going to implement everything that's in here, but it's important to know what is possible, what is recommended, what is happening at the enterprise level, so that you can, take whatever is good practices out of that can be implemented for your clients in ways that you can implement it and manage it, and also in ways that fits their budget. So for our Patch Tuesday review for this month, we had a much smaller month than last. Last month was about 160 vulnerabilities being addressed. This month was only 55, 56. If you count that one of the vulnerabilities was updated to include Windows 11 as well, that was a vulnerability addressed last month. Of the 55 addressed, 4 of them are 0 days. So these were vulnerabilities existed unannounced, no fixes for them, but now Microsoft is addressing 4 of them. 3 rated critical, 3 are under active exploitation, and those are those 0 days. And we always like to put this in perspective. Even though it is only 55 vulnerabilities that are being addressed, there's 114 different deployments available to address these vulnerabilities. And whenever you match that out between the different products that these address, it's about 1,200 different mappings that exist there. So even though our tools and our processes make it fairly trivial for us to address patching on Windows systems, do not let the triviality of it, the ease of it, or the respective ease of it, lower the perceived value of it. Just because it's easy should not diminish the value of the service. It's still an important part of vulnerability remediation and mitigation services. So refer to it as such and do not devalue it. For some more vulnerabilities of note in this month, there was CVE 2025-21377. This is another NTLM hash vulnerability. There have been quite a few of these over the past couple of months, and NTLM hash attacks are one of the more popular attacks that threat actors use once they gain access to environments. Um, it's becoming popular even for whenever they don't have access to environments because of man-in-the-middle attacks and forced NTLM authentications like this one. This one allows an attacker to obtain the NTLM v2 hash of an authenticated user by sending them or by some means getting a malicious file on the endpoint. That could possibly be via email or any other way that it could find its way to an endpoint. Apparently, it does not require interaction from a user. It may involve the preview pane inside of Outlook. Microsoft is not really releasing a lot of details or information about this one. It does affect all Microsoft OSs since Server 2008, according to what is on the Microsoft release notes. But because this involves MS-HTML and other Internet Explorer components that are still present in systems, that might be an indicator that this is also a vulnerability that would work against 2007, Windows 7, Windows 8 boxes, potentially even older. If it was a Windows system that the Internet Explorer 11 was ever available for, then it may be vulnerable to this. Microsoft isn't just expanding the scope that far because, well, they do not care about Windows 7 and Windows 8 anymore. This is also likely the unnamed vulnerability that's been addressed by the Zero Patch project since 2024, since they were Acro Security was one of the acknowledgments in this vulnerability being addressed. So this might be, that's about a 3-month delay between the vulnerability being disclosed, it being addressed by a third party, and then Microsoft adding it into their Patch Tuesday mix. So if you ever have a challenge with a client, with a prospect that is of the mentality that, well, Windows Update is set to automatically update, therefore it should automatically update and we should not have any problems there, and I can be less concerned about security, this is a great example of something you can point at and show them that that's not good enough. Microsoft is not always going to be applying patches and updates in a timely manner. Not just on does the system apply it, but does Microsoft make it available in the first place? And that is why all of these other security controls that we need to implement are necessary. KB 5014754. This is an update from last year, I believe, that introduced stronger certificate-based authentication and certificate mapping. This is something that's going to apply to Windows Server 2008, 12, 16, 19, and 2022, apparently. This is one of those might have been a ticking time bomb in your environments if you never looked into this KB or what it was about. So this is if you have servers set up in your environment running the certificate authority role, this is probably going to be a concern for you if you set that up many years ago. That's because this introduced that stronger key binding for certificate-based authentication, but did not force it yet. And the newer updates that are coming out are the ones that are going to start forcing this behavior. So this is one of those things of you should have, I don't want to say you should have known, but the announcements were already made, the warnings were already made. Now the enforcement is happening via updates, via other actions. So there may be some situations out there where you have systems that start failing to communicate or start failing their authentication and binding actions here in your environment, and you may be able to tie it back to this. I've seen a little bit of chatter about this myself, so just this is a general warning. Is everybody going to have this problem? No, it's probably only going to be very, very few people that are actually going to have this issue. But go check your DC logs for ID for event IDs 39, 40, 41. That should give you a clear indication that, yeah, this is happening in my environment and I need to chase this down. And this also kind of points out the importance of, you can't just, say, all right, Microsoft released the patches, apply all the patches and don't investigate. There's always additional mitigation. There may be mitigation notes. There might be additional recommendations that Microsoft is having. Sometimes these are things that run in 1, 2, or 3 phases over years. And it can fly under the radar and then just bite you one day. And this is a good example of why a little bit of effort and time and resources have to be applied to this effort. And again, back to why just setting your systems to automatic update is not the be-all end-all solution.